thank John for joining us and toss it over to him.
All right, hi everybody. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. I'm super excited to be part of a conversation with two really dear friends of mine, Kristen and Nathan, and also within the context of a space that they run that I also hold very dear. I had the good fortune of exhibiting at Roman Susan in 2013, December 2013, I believe. And at the time, I was kind of very much so transitioning into moving image work from painting and installation, and also coming off of the long stint of running a gallery space where I didn't feel like I was making very much work because I was doing a lot of organizational stuff. And so that was sort of that, that 2013, 2012, 2013 is really when I felt like I kind of hit a stride with making work again after running that space. And the piece that I presented there was called Suncatcher. It was a video work. It was a video work based on a Super 8 film. So Super 8, the kind of old school analog film, very small gauge, not super high resolution, kind of consumer grade. At when it was what it was meant to be, but obviously is taken on a different life in the experimental film world from there. And I'm just gonna kind of talk through the installation really quick, and then we're gonna jump into a presentation that shows you that piece, and then sort of where that piece took me over the next 5 years or so with the work that I have been making and kind of continue to make at this point. So the installation, this was it was at the winter months, I remember. So it was like December, and it was meant to be a sort of short installation in between other exhibitions, and something that didn't necessarily require a lot of maintenance by Kristen and Nathan. I didn't want them to have to go there and give open hours because I wasn't going to be there. So I drove from Minneapolis and installed this show, and then went back to Minneapolis. And we had our 6-month-old daughter in tow also. So that was another aspect of it, who kind of slept in the corner the whole time while we installed. And not the first time that she slept in the corner of Roman Susan, for sure. But or no, maybe that was the first time, not the last time, excuse me. Anyway, so we installed the show there. So what I was rear projecting onto the window, so I put a piece of vellum on the window, just like your average Home Depot privacy screen, and I blocked out the other two windows with black velour, like black soft goods from a theater. And the show just ran when it was dark. It was probably 5 to, I don't know if it ran till 11 or something like that. Evening hours. We had it on a timer. So real low impact on the gallerists here, and that was sort of the impact, the intent of it, but it also kind of gave me ideas about ways in which I could install video pieces and then film pieces, and then also the form of the film piece had a lot to do with the direction that I went. So this is sort of like the genesis of this kind of diptych, triptych, analog film. Moving forwards, backwards, lots of in-camera effects. So time lapse, interventions with the lens, all kinds of stuff. Anything that I can do to sort of change the way the camera works. That's what this is kind of about. Double exposures, things like that. So I'm going to jump into this, share my screen and jump into this presentation. Gonna make sure that I'm sharing sound, and I have optimized this video clip. Oh, but I want to be back here, right? Escape. Stand by. Okay, so this is a still from that piece. This is a piece called Suncatcher. And so what we see here is the same film presented 3 times. The outside films are moving forwards, and the inside film is moving backwards. And this is another aspect of this piece that really was signified a change for me, is that this is the first piece of motion picture film that I developed myself. So this is black and white reversal Kodak Tri-X film, and I developed it myself. And that's how I've done all of my black and white film since. So that's another thing you'll kind of notice, is these sort of like visual similarities between this piece and everything else that I show. So this is a still from that. And then we're going to check out, next is a sort of installation montage of the install at Roman Susan. All right. Go to the next slide. So this is now, here, I'm going to start again. This is basically the pro scanned version of that. This is the way it is intended to look, you know, on a screen, not within a window, not outside, so forth. Is the hair salon still open, by the way?
So the person who ran the hair salon passed away a year ago.
That's what I remember. Yeah.
But
Is the sign still there?
the sign is down.
They took the sign.
Oh, bummer.
But
the family took the sign.
Yeah, the family
Oh,
has
okay,
the sign.
cool.
And
well, at least I'm glad that it's in.
yeah, and we actually had a chance to
place.
meet their family more, and they're lovely. So yes.
Cool. So yeah, here's basically a detail of that piece. This is about a minute long, just so you know. Okay, and another thing that I failed to mention about the installation was that for the openings, we were there for an opening reception, and my wife Crystal and I performed music at it. So there's a sound component, and the sound that you hear in that video piece comes directly from that night. We were recording different elements of what we were doing while we were performing, and it translated into this piece of music that then became the background sound piece for this piece. And it also, so pretty much everything that I show you tonight, my wife Crystal and I have collaborated on the music for, with the exception of one piece, I think. So it's that this part of this practice is definitely very much so about Crystal and I composing music for moving image within the context of gallery spaces, performance venues, not necessarily the cinema, although sometimes. We'll talk a little bit about that later. So then that was 2013. that led to me collaborating with a really great filmmaker, good friend of mine, Sam Houlihan, another Twin Cities-based filmmaker. We were commissioned by a festival here called Northern Lights, which is a really interesting, really awesome festival. A lot of work, a lot of hard work for a lot of artists, and a huge opportunity for a ton of artists too. It's an all-night and Nuit Blanche festival, and so it runs all night long. And now is extended to be like a weekend and across both the Twin Cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul, and includes incredible installations, all kinds of interactive stuff, tons of family friendly stuff. It's just a huge boom for like artists. It's a huge thing for the economy here too. A lot of like independent restaurants and cafes and bars and breweries get involved, and it's just like all hands on deck Twin Cities in the summer when it's like actually warm enough for us to be outside all night. This piece is called City 3, was commissioned for that festival. I'm going to show you a clip about it, and then I'm going to go to the next slide and tell you a little bit about how that installation actually went down, which is kind of a funny story. Okay, so the original plan for this piece was that it was going to be projected on the facade of a former Japanese restaurant called Fujiya here that was on the riverfront. Here in Minneapolis, the riverfront means the Mississippi, downtown, kind of in the old like mill district. It's massive, old sort of super 70s Japanese restaurant, just like a big block sitting on like a smaller block of concrete. And we had like commissioned had a custom made 40-foot wide white tarp to project onto this, amazing surface, did all these tests. It looked so good. We were going to be like outside, the projectors were going to be exposed. Everything was going to be analog. We were going to run it for 8 hours. And it was like literally a monsoon, like the entire time. So at 8 p.m., just like downpoured till 8 a.m. the next day. It was nuts. It was felt unsafe to be outside. And so we totally just like pivoted. Like we had to re-engineer this whole piece really quick. And so I borrowed a pop-up tent, surrounded it with tarps. Instead of projecting onto the building, we're projecting onto the concrete like block that the building sits on, which is like got a little overhang. And I'm not kidding that like hundreds of people still came to this piece and they were all drenched, and like by, it's like 3 p.m. or 3 a.m., it's like everybody is completely wet and they're also completely wasted. And they're like, I don't even know where I am and what the hell is this? Like it was pretty incredible experience. I mean, in this space too, you can imagine this is right on the river. There were like rats like running back and forth. Like, it was, it was, kind of an experience. But so this kind of symbolizes a big step though for me and my collaborator and great friend Sam Houlihan. Is this was our opportunity to jump from Super 8 to 16 millimeter. We had both shot 16 millimeter, but it was sort of like after this piece, we sort of I haven't used a Super 8 camera since then, and just twice the gauge. It's a lot easier to work with. The image is higher res. It's better in many ways. We also then took that piece to Roman Susan. So this is us presenting it outdoors on the wall, the embankment here of the Metro. And this was a great night. This was a great weekend. I was also in town for another art exhibition that was at Chicago Artists Coalition that I helped organize, sort of an exchange with another gallery here in the Twin Cities. So here, this is Sam, and then in the middle, and then I'm on the right. And what we would do is just we would basically have a looping projection in the middle, and then run each reel on the inside, on the outside, and on either side, and then rewind it on manual rewinds, and then put another one on, and so that would just kind of run for a couple hours. I think we did it for like 2 or 3 hours or something like that. And I thought that the light actually translated remarkably well, given all the light that is out there outside the gallery. So then this piece was another big thing for me and Sam as well, Sam Houlihan. This was the first time that we were accepted to a really amazing festival of what's called expanding cinema in New York City called Mono Noir Ware. It's run by a guy named Steve Kosman. And this is, he runs a really great organization that has a film lab and, you know, film distro. And he also had put on this annual festival every year that we had known about and thought was really amazing. But it's just, you know, it's like anything that has, it's like film, projection plus something else. So that can mean performance, live music, a lot of interventions with like projection, you know, the sort of classic expanded cinema where it's like you're sort of, you know, putting things in front of the projection lens, or like, you know, think about like overhead projections with like water and smoke, things like that. So this was a huge thing. This is held in Bushwick, Brooklyn. Every year it was until last year. And so this was our first time there. That was actually in 2014. So right at the end of 2014. So this piece was, you know, the Suncatcher piece really led into this piece becoming something that we could actually like, we had the ambition to like take it further. Really happy with the way that this went. We got a lot of really positive feedback. Really amazing space. So this is huge photo studio in Bushwick, you know, with a gigantic like 30-foot tall, you know, photo sweep, and just like, you know, it's a really wonderful experience with a ton of amazing artists, and the audience is all super engaged. If you're ever in New York in December and it's happening, I highly recommend that you go to it. This is another change with this is that not a change, I guess, but this is me performing live to that piece, City 3. So I'm actually back by the projections doing this. And that was the last time that I had done that. And I actually kind of missed this because that sort of signifies another change in the practice of perhaps expanded cinema, projection and music, but definitely something that was like absolutely born from that Suncatcher piece at Roman Susan. So the next piece, this is the next year at Mono Noir Ware. This is a piece called Reflectors. This is Crystal's on the left here and I'm on the right. We're performing live sort of on the stage. And this is when we sort of become part of the experience that the audience actually experiences. This is another really important shift for me, is where we like took the diptych and triptych and we flipped it. So it's like we have a vertical diptych with another projection over at the top of it. So you can sort of see that there's, you know, obviously you see two projections, and then there's another one overlaying in the middle, which it changes the color, changes the sort of contrast, and then also invites and infuses a bunch more movement into that piece. This was also another really great experience. This piece went on to also show at like the Weizmann Art Museum. I can't remember what film festival. Might have been Milwaukee Underground Film Festival. I think that's what it was. So this, you know, the idea that we could then kind of travel with pieces like this kind of came from not only the Suncatcher piece, but Mono Noir Ware, and that became definitely a significant part of the practice. So I'm going to give you a short clip of what, you know, this is sort of a digital version of that. This is a really abstract. These film stocks, by the way, are double perforated, like fully expired film stocks where all of the color has gone away. So this is what you get, is you get blue and no blue, right? And this, I don't think I'll ever find another film stock like this. We just like took a chance on eBay on this, and it turned out so well. So yeah, again, another piece of music that Crystal and I composed. This was definitely, this was sort of my, like the beginning of my like sort of obsession or love affair with granular synthesis, just like creating large sounds out of tiny chunks of sound. Kind of hear that in the vocal effects there. So let's see what's next. Pardon me. So this next piece that I'm going to talk about is called Stasis in Motion. This is actually yet again at Mata Norwari, which I think we're maybe the only artists that have ever been invited there 3 times. We had a really good relationship with the guy that runs it, and we have been declined a handful of times too. But this piece was actually commissioned by the Walker Arts Center in 2017. The commission actually started in 2016. It's when Ruth Hodgins, who I believe is on the board, maybe still on the board at Roman Susan. She worked as the assistant curator of moving image at the Walker Arts Center here in Minneapolis. And the piece that was commissioned it's called Stasis in Motion. It was for a program called Expanding the Frame. Kind of how we fit into it was obvious that, you know, we were doing something that was in the sort of realm of expanded cinema, using multiple projections, overlapping, kind of pushing the camera like out of its frame, out of its kind of body of what it's supposed to do. And then also like obviously the live music aspect of it. This piece was super amazing to work on. We were able to actually access the archives of the Walker Arts Center. So their moving image and actually sound recording archives and pretty much anything that we wanted access to. But we were able to curate a program there that included our piece, and so we went through the archives and kind of chose different works that we were really interested in, things that had influence on us, things we were like, oh my gosh, I wish I could have seen that, but I was, you know, like 13 and lived in Iowa when it happened, you know, things like that. So we put together a project, not a project, but a program that included Lewis Hawk, who's an experimental filmmaker who had shown exhibitions there that were very much so installation based, but he's a filmmaker and an instructor. Also Peter Bundy and Brian Elsom, which made this really amazing film that was really sort of underrepresented film that just had amazing color, really great sound design. Paul Schartz, we presented a piece of his where it's the piece where it's basically just the ends of the film. So it's just like after, you know, the flare out, like when, you know, all it is just light and weird color, like flapping around. And then my favorite part of that program was that we were able to access the sound archive, and I picked a piece by Pauline Oliveros, who had performed one of her deep listening meditations in the Coles conservatory there. So an old, you know, it's no longer this, but, you know, sort of like a conservatory for plants, but, you know, affected accordion, really amazing recording too, because you could hear like people and water, like the fountain happening, you know, this fountain in there and like people walking by, and the only microphones are like the microphones that are inside of her accordion, and that's picking it up. And then we were able to perform this piece. So I'm going to show a clip of this. This is kind of towards the end of it. This is a 22-minute long piece. So longer, way longer, like through composed composition for Crystal and I. A lot more film. This is all still totally hand processed black and white film that Sam and I both shot and processed here at our studio. So here is a clip of that. Okay, so yeah, here, this is so we're looking at, this is Crystal and I performing to that piece when it was performed at Mananora. So this is a general idea of our instrumentation. Probably for the last, as long as I've been doing this kind of work, my primary instrument is a modular synthesizer. And Crystal here with a lot of like vocal effects and keyboard. A lot of times I'm processing things that are happening with her instruments as well. So adding effects and chopping them up, sampling and resampling, happening live. So the next piece that I'm gonna talk about is called A Veiled Cascade. And I'm kind of realizing, and I sort of felt this way earlier, but this is like, this slideshow could be called like 5 films about water or triptychs and diptychs rule everything around me. Definitely the sort of trajectory that I have been on since that piece, Suncatcher, back at Rolling Season in 2013. So this piece, this is a piece called A Veiled Cascade. Received a Minnesota State Arts grant to make this piece. The primary aspect of the grant was that I was actually going to travel to northern Minnesota on the North Shore, on Lake Superior, to a specific river called the Cascade River, and I was going to spend a weekend there shooting the river. And this river is called the Cascade River because most of the rivers in northern Minnesota come off of a very high bluff down to the lake, and so there are lots of really dramatic waterfalls. And I went there in late October. I think it was like right around, it was like Halloween weekend or something like that. And it was the first snow, so that was added a lot of, well, it added some challenges with the photography, but it also just added a lot of like fun and interesting ways of carrying around lots of big analog equipment. And, it was a wonderful weekend. But the piece is basically ended up being a 4-channel analog installation. So no digital projections. These are all on 16mm projectors with manual looping devices on them. A good friend of mine, Ben Morin, had been able, like, this is a design that's out there. You've probably seen it at galleries, but you know, it's sort of it's a platter that has a wheel in the middle of it, and you kind of backwind your film on it and take out the back and then pull out the front, splice it together, wind it through the projector, and it sort of just runs over itself. And this friend of mine, Ben, had figured out a way to make them with like laser cutters, and then ended up making a couple for me that were 3D printed, which are like a fraction of the cost of the ones you can like actually get, like the pro ones, which was amazing. And so these held 100 feet of film, and that's what you're seeing. Each one of these projections has 100 feet of film on it. And I'm still kind of in the diptych thing here for sure. I'm going to show you a kind of poorly made video that I made on my iPhone the night of the exhibition. This was the or the night of the reception, just because I kind of like the energy of it, but it'll give you a sense of the way that it felt. It also has a sound piece component that I made exclusively, and it's basically it's a drone where I had recorded a bunch of sound of the waterfall as well, of the river, and then kind of made pitch shifted chords out of it. So you'll hear that in this as well. Was a short one. So the last couple of pieces here I'm going to show you are just kind of what I've been doing since these last pieces. Something else happened in 2018 is that my second daughter was born, and so I have slowed down considerably. I also started going to graduate school, and that makes me ineligible for a lot of the funding here. So I've kind of slowed down a little bit, but one thing that I have maintained, and this has been great for both Crystal and I, is that we have since, well, up until COVID, we were able to perform music a lot. We just had a lot of opportunities to perform live, and took them all the time. And we would integrate these, my projections into those performances anytime that we could. If the venue was, open to it and warranted it, we would try to do that. So I'm going to show you a couple of pieces that we've shown in that context. And then we're going to stop the slideshow and open it up for questions. And the sound to this is actually a solo piece by Crystal. This is off of a record of hers that she released on her label called Moonglyph from Portland, called Cove. So this is a solo sound piece by her. All right. Should mention that this film too also actually has there's two like film failures in this piece. One is which that the claw inside my camera, so the mechanism that pulls the sprockets down was slipping, and so you have this like total blur or whatever. And then when I was developing it, the bleach, the reversal bleach to turn black and white negative film into or reversal film into something that you don't have to print a positive of. The bleach that bleaches the silver halides was like worn out, meaning that it wasn't good to do anymore. And so it's like the parts that should be pure sort of like white are this like silvery gray, which I really love. It's kind of like these things that I could potentially like mimic them on my own, but these happy accidents that happened with the piece. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hopefully see people's faces.
That was great, John. Thank you so much. Yeah, everyone, you are welcome to just unmute and jump into the conversation. I'm gonna get to a question after a long-winded thanking of John, I think, because I'm really glad to hear that sort of the moment of sharing this one particular moving image at Rome and Susan sort of gave you a trajectory, because I think, or led into a trajectory, because it definitely did that for us. I think we had been like, our space had been open a little over a year at that point, and we hadn't shown any moving image, and it wasn't on our radar. It was very much like painting and sculpture and group shows, and sort of airing toward what I would say is maximalism. We would put a lot of stuff in a little space. And I think that, yeah, when you did this and it sort of activated that space, even when we weren't there, and it had sort of this limit of, how long is that piece? 3 or 4 minutes, something like that.
Yeah. It's a full reel of film, so it's like 3-ish,
Yeah, but there's like sort of like this innate strength in the loop, where I've seen that loop like 50, 100 times, and it keeps moving. And so it sort of holds the space in a certain way. And then basically we had shown no moving image. It wasn't on our radar. And then as soon as this happened, we were like, this is what we should be doing a lot of the time. And I think we immediately did a group video projection thing to the street using your projector. I think we just like left it there and showed a ton of people's work. And like we have, from that, we started this series, and I think the next month we're doing the 9th iteration of the series, and like 200 artists have shown their work in it. And it's basically directly out of you showing this single work. And now I've like watched possibly thousands of videos looking for strong loops.
Yeah.
And so, and in the course of watching tons of moving image stuff, one thing I have noticed is that if I watch 100 videos, 10 or 20 will have moving water in them. And it is sort of like elemental CGI and just like catnip for filmmakers.
Right.
And so it's super interesting to me because it is not always the case that people transform that source material to make it more interesting than it is as a starting point, because water is just hypnotic and super interesting to look at. So I'm wondering if you talk a little bit about the process of, like you were talking earlier, of using different strategies to change the way you are taking light in when you are filming things like water. Because I think that's, Suncatcher is all water, right? It's light all
Yeah, it's all the Mississippi River. I shot it from the Washington Avenue Bridge, which goes across the Mississippi and on like in the University of Minnesota campus. It's like a walking bridge. I think it was March when I shot it. I want to think that it was March. Remember, it was still cold, but melted. And yeah, so first of all, the water thing for me, definitely like one of the reasons why and with the exception of the City 3 piece, which I feel like is definitely the way that I used to make moving image work, and a lot of my other visual artwork, painting, installation work was really focused on this sort of like rugged architecture of the urban environment. And I live in a pretty inner city residential neighborhood that can get pretty rough at times. And so making work with the camera and with microphones and things like that too, a lot of times draws me out of that environment. You know, I need to, what I want to do is experience, like I want something to feel like a little bit more peaceful than what I experience in my normal environment. So that's the water thing for sure. And then absolutely, I mean, water is just kind of pure cinema. And I live in Minnesota, and we can talk about the importance of water and the politics around water, and how there are, tons of artists like up north, blocking the Line 3 pipeline right now, with a lot of indigenous and tribal folks up there saying, this is, water needs to be protected. And I think the more that we can, sort of connect with it and visualize its beauty, it takes us away from the sort of things about it that we take for granted, like, oh, I turned on the water, or, if you're not in Texas or something like that, you can turn on the water. And it runs out of the tap and you can drink it, things like that. So that's definitely that's kind of the sort of like draw towards nature. But the intervention, a lot of that stuff, that's kind of like where the planning process goes into making films with mechanical cameras and not being able to change a lot after the fact. Of course, I could have it all digitally scanned and then get surgical and really, really change the way something looks and feels, go crazy with color, whatever. But these sort of mechanical, the mechanical processes that are inherent to the cameras, these subtle things that you can do to shift them or make, interjection, interference, to me can turn out like way more like pleasing results, way more interesting than anything that you could do digitally. And so a lot of that planning process, kind of is like charting where you are on the roll of film in terms of feet, thinking like, I know that perhaps I had like half of the frame masked, so it's no lights coming into it for part of it, for this section. So I know that I want to have something that's meaningful over on that section of the frame during that part when I run over it again. And a lot of these processes, with the exception of the Super 8 camera, which the Super 8 camera that I use for Suncatcher could actually run the film back into the cartridge. And you're not really supposed to be able to do that. It's with a camera that Braun Nizo made, German camera designed by Dieter Rams, like one of the most beautiful pieces of photographic equipment ever made, ever. I mean, you just like look at it and you're like, I want to use that. And then you try to use it and you're like, the thing's fucking broken. It's because Super 8 cameras are just chock full of like crazy mechanics and little like ICs and, trying to computerize things that whatever. And the 16 millimeter camera that I use is 100% mechanical. It's like got a Swiss made wound spring. You wind it till it's taut, you let it go, it runs for 30 seconds, you wind it again. Definitely things you can do with it. But one of the things that I end up doing with it a lot is running the film through once, taking it back to the dark room, winding the film back. So that's how I get a lot of my double exposures. The intervalometer stuff with the Super 8 camera, that's all built in and kind of like, computerized in some way. With the 16 millimeter camera, I have a mechanical device that is really super, I wish I had it with me, but a super like rudimentary device that actually it's probably computerized. It is computerized for sure. But what it does is it just has a little like stick that opens and shuts the frame. So it's got a thing that mechanically opens and shuts it at a determined time. So the computer on the inside of the box is telling it, whatever, like do it 5 times a minute. So it'd be like, and then whatever, or do it a bunch of times a minute, So those sort of kind of interventions with the camera, like changing the way that it's supposed to run, changing your idea of the way the sort of frame rate is supposed to run. But a lot of it is a lot of the stuff that you saw is the masking stuff. It's sort of like, it's like I got the lens of the camera, like, right up to a leaf, and so I can like see this, this is the leaf and it's moving and it's cutting off half of the frame. So all I have is the little bit of light that's let through that leaf and then everything else that's on the other side of the leaf. Yeah. That kind of answer the question? Take it somewhere else.
That definitely answers the question.
Hi, Joanne and Morgan, by the way. It's nice to see you all. Thanks for coming.
I think that in addition to like sort of launching us into being hungry for moving image stuff, when you came back and projected on the train wall the next summer, because I think that was like 6 months later or something. It was like the following summer. And so it sort of like the start of winter where it's cold and there's this thing that anyone can experience in this small way. And then it's like the dead of summer when it's grossly warm and there are people hanging out outside and projecting on the train wall. Like, I think the successful things we've adopted for programmatic purposes are always artists doing things and us seeing them and being like, oh, we should really go more in that direction. So like I suggest projecting on that train wall to like every third person we work with. And tons of people have now done it and just sort of like taken our space outside of our space.
Yeah, but nobody's done it with real projectors.
No one else has brought real projectors yet. Or real analog projectors. So anyways, I think those two sort of things launched us in interesting directions.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really feel like I have questions more. I mean, besides, I just feel like I have comments because I feel like I'm just like.
Just tell me what you think, Kristen. Come on. I've had it come in. I know.
or anyone else who wants to. Yeah.
No, I'm just like really moved. I'm just moved by the body of work and how just kind of like soulful and timeless it is. And I feel like it's just like this really amazing glimpse into your personality, into your like psyche, I guess. And I think like that's just like how I like to experience art, and the and why I love having artists as friends. And I think that that I don't know, I guess I feel like I was surprised actually, um, when I first was exposed to your moving image work, because I didn't know your art as, because I knew you as an organizer, and I knew you kind of as this thinker and talker. And then when I saw
Talker, definitely
when I
talker.
saw the work, I feel like it was like this whole other side of you was exposed to me, and I think that it was really touching. And I feel like it all just like comes across as being really like almost from just like it just is like, it's not like, yeah, it's just like it's such a statement. And um yeah, I don't know. Like that's what I think. Like I'm feeling really emotional about it, because uh and like just with the sound and the kind of like repetition, but also like the sort of like there's kind of like this infinite quality. And I guess I'm wondering, I mean, I think like the way that you explain sort of like your connection with the process and the film and the observation of the sort of like skill of being able to manipulate it, I think it like really jives with the sort of like uh I guess sort of like purity and accessibility of the content, because you're just kind of like, okay, like I'm in the world, and now I'm going to apply this like filter to it in a way, and like this is how I'm going to like analyze it, or not analyze it, but just like absorb it or capture it. um I don't know if I gave you anything to respond to.
Well, definitely, and there were I think a couple other people had unmuted, but yeah, it's I mean definitely the idea of filtering my experience through that work, and then also, you know, going out with the camera or microphone or something like that is definitely choosing to experience the world in a specific way, and that's um, it kind of you have to use what's there, but you choose the way you embody it, instead of it just kind of like feeling like it's hitting you or washing over you. You're just like, no, I'm gonna actually, I have some choices here. I have some agency in this, you know. Um, cool. Colleen, did you have something?
Oh, I just think that it was so nice to I agree, like just the word soulful, and that it's so moving, because there's something like primal. I'm so blown away that you can do all of this. Like that you can do all of the technical stuff is so amazing to me, that I'm so impressed, and I'm envious because I don't know. I mean, I love the moving image and projections and sound, and but I'm so I don't know how to do. I've never done film, like real film, or I mean analog. So I mean still work, but amazed. And Crystal's um music, that piano solo is ah, I'm just like, wow, your life. Oh, my battery is did I just go? You're
Still here
and
for
you
a
have 2
second.
daughters. I have 2 daughters. Go daughters.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I don't know. I guess just like that you're making this work. It's so inspiring. I don't know. I feel emotional too. Like, how do we be artists, And we have these, you have kids, and then just this desire to go and capture the world, like what you just said, that we have choices, and that all of it is a choice, that what we choose to I mean, lately I haven't been filming except for the snow makes me want to. It's like there's something that pulls me. Isn't that nice that the world pulls us to make work? And then, oh, and I just can't, I now I know why Ruth was so drawn to your work too, because I mean, I don't know if all of this is on your website, but she's making all these films with water. And Nathan, I love you saying it's the filmmaker's catnip. It's, I'm like, where am I using water? Yes, I have a piece with a river that I put in slow motion. It's like, oh, we can't help it. So there's no question other than like as I was watching, or that I can remember, because I'm overwhelmed, is as I'm watching and listening to, it was a great presentation, by the way. So many, I was flooded with so many thoughts, and now I don't remember them actually, which is a shame, but I'd have to rewind and see, like the trees, you know how you did that diptych with the trees? I'm blown away. That is so cool. It's not, I don't have any formed, let's see, what could I actually ask you? Like, how do you know how to do all of this stuff? Like, where was your training? Because you did painting.
Yeah, I actually don't, yeah, for the most part. Yep. And as an artist, as a visual artist, I'm mostly self-taught. Yeah, I have, so in a sort of former life, I got a degree in sound art, which is essentially audio production. So I have a lot of training in that for sure. And I've had a long career doing that as well. But I grew up as an artist, a visual artist. It sort of was on the track, like the sort of art school track, for sure.
Like even as a kid?
As a kid, but then really, really dug deep in as a teenager, to the point where I maybe didn't have any other options besides art school, you know, like didn't just stop taking math classes, you know, like that would be the only way for me to go to college, for me to go to a private art school. Wasn't going to get into a state school anywhere. And did, you know, sort of made choices to apply to schools and things like that. Decided not to do that at all, and just kind of went out on my own for a while. And then did the audio thing. And then I have you know, other training, but it's and degrees, but they're things that relate to art, but not, they're more like arts administrative stuff, not actually you know, artists, you know, it's like studio practice stuff. But the people that I've surrounded myself with my entire adult life are practicing artists, studio artists, instructors, administrators. And, you know, just being in the, like my brother always says this to me, is like, you know, very achieved academically. Always says, you know, running that gallery, it's like, that was like you getting your MFA. Like you didn't need to get an MFA. Like that was it, you know. You're never going to go to an MFA program that's going to give you that, you know. It's like 5 years of like, you know, literally hundreds of arts exhibitions cross disciplines, you know. So yeah, self-taught for the most part.
Incredible. Yeah, I mean, that is incredibly impressive. And do you prefer, I mean, now that you're doing making, do you ever see yourself going back to doing facilitate, like any space ideas?
Like administrative stuff?
Like, do you want to do any, I mean, do you?
Oh yeah, oh for sure, yep. And so I run a space. I'm in it, I'm actually in it right now. I'll give you kind of a sense of, it's a gallery.
Oh, cool.
So I'm in a gallery. Doesn't have anything in it right now, but it's a gallery.
Oh, cool.
Give you a really short tour of the studio as well. So yeah, I run this space with 12 other artists. It's going to get dark here for a sec. It's kind of crazy, but
great, John. Thank you for walking us around.
Yeah, so this is a multi-use studio. I'm not going to take you down to the basement because it's kind of that's scary, but that's where the dark room is. We have a full like wet lab dark room down there. So yeah, great friends of mine. This is Casey Deming's space right here. Sorry, Casey, putting you on.
Mhm.
Thought we talked about you picking up your desk, man. The hell? But so yeah, definitely. And I'm actually in a graduate program right now that's called Arts and Cultural Leadership, and it's basically an arts administration master's degree.
Mm.
So yeah. To
Okay.
being in spaces like this, being in in an administrative role is really, it's hard for me to kind of imagine my artistic practice, like even going any further, if I don't continue to be around artists that are working in a capacity where I can help them. And that's how I learn, is by like, oh, I saw, it's like these guys saying like, oh, we saw that how you worked with the windows and we now recommend that. It's like I've seen like hundreds of artists mount exhibitions, over the last 15 years, and I learned so much from that, So
Wow. It's just amazing.
I think I can come up with a question related to what you just said, because I think when you shared Suncatcher, Roman Susan, like I said, we had done lots of things that were very maximal and very much filling up the space. And I think one of the things I internalized from a curator I've worked with is this sort of like the real difficulty of only saying as much as you need to support the most important thing you're trying to say, and keeping it minimal if it needs to be minimal or not, and like where do you stop and show restraint. So I'm wondering, is that something you picked up from observing lots of other people trying and failing or succeeding at doing too much?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a really strong advocate for making edits. And I will say, actually, in the work that you saw, there are no internal edits at all. It's all in camera. I've made no cuts in any of those pieces of film, none. Think I shot, for the piece Stasis in Motion, I probably shot like twice as many rolls of film. I think I ended up using probably 900 feet of film for that. But I'm sure that I think I have 900 feet that I didn't end up using. And I think a lot of, especially in an exhibition platform, in a gallery or even a museum, which I've done a little bit of work in museums, where I feel like, especially if I have any sort of say in what is being presented, I have to show a lot of restraint to like not tell an artist like, you shouldn't do that. This is a bad decision you're making right now. Visually, this is something that is going to be challenging for your audience. What you're doing is a hindrance to something really good that's happening over here. Things like that. I mean, I'm comfortable being really upfront with people, but I'm also I'm super like strong, like kind of like artist advocate, where it's like, this is your chance to learn. And I feel like, in a platform like a storefront gallery, it's like, that's kind of what it's for. You're a burgeoning artist who's going to make some mistakes, and that's cool. But I agree, it's like sometimes when I've worked with other curators that do have a really strong sense of like sort of reduction to an exhibition. You're saying this for this purpose. This doesn't support that purpose. It goes away. And I had to make some really sort of strong statements and gestures with this really large exhibition that I co-curated with a old friend of mine and collaborator art of this named David Peterson. We were co-curators of a large exhibition, huge 12,000 square foot former soap factory called the Soap Factory. And it was an 8-week exhibition, 40 artists. It was their 2013 Minnesota Biennial. The director of the space had really liked what he had seen us do at Art of This and asked us to curate that show, which was a huge opportunity for us. We did just 100 studio visits or more. We're able to work with a budget way bigger than anything we'd ever had in the past. Pass out a lot of that money to artists, give them more opportunity to make work or support their work in ways that maybe they didn't have at that time. Very much so a showcase of you know, mostly emerging artists, but some, you know, mid-career established artists here in the Twin Cities, and outstate as well. And that, you know, working in an environment that I felt like had those sort of like high stakes, it was, I mean, we would sit there until like, you know, 2 a.m, like just editing. You know, people would bring in work and give us their ideas about where they wanted it and how they wanted it to feel, and maybe even start to install some things, and then they come back in the next day and they'd be like, "Oh, you took that down." It's like, yeah, we took it down. You know, we had to, you know, just, you know. So that, I think that it's important that in certain circumstances you sort of you just let someone just go with it. You know, and the sort of maximalist thing can mean something as well. You know what I mean? It absolutely can. It's sort of like, I always find like whenever I think about work that sort of has a commentary on like digital culture, I'm like, just fucking like pour it on me. You know what I mean? I want to be like blasted with like ones and zeros so hard that I like hit the floor and then they start raining down on me. And then like,
Yeah.
you know, and all I can see is like black and white for the rest of my life, you know? Like, so.
That's kind of my question for you.
Yeah, Joanne, sorry, that was a long-winded answer. And I know you had unmuted earlier.
I feel like this is the opportunity to talk to you about art instead of like picking up our kids.
Right. Yeah, no doubt.
So like I think you're really good at light. You know, like it's, as visual artists, like all we're doing is like translating the way our eyes pick up light. And you're using, you know, the film work, the analog film work is so much about the film and how the light hits the film and the tool that lets the light through to hit the film. Like it's so physical. And I think, you know, beyond that, it's like you're the person that takes in the light. And then we're talking, Kristen was like the soul, you know, works with the light. But now, like you're talking about digital. So I can't help but think about like the person and the light and the analog and the light and then the digital and the light, and your take on what's happening to us as our tools change from our eyes to the pixels. Yeah, I'm just interested to hear what you think about that.
Yeah. That's a really great question. I feel like I've said this in you know, in like sort of like post screening talks and things like that, like in the past, where people are, you know, really like taken by the black and white film. You know, it's like, why do you use black and white? Well, first of all, I am like legally colorblind. So I do like to shoot color film. I love saturated colors, saturated reds, you know, Ektachrome, Kodak Ektachrome. Wow, really strikes a chord with me. Love it. I also like really like color shifted stuff too. Things that aren't meant to be the colors that they are, like that blue reflectors piece where it was like, this film, you know, should have, you know, that was, all that footage was shot at night and you shouldn't have been able to see anything really. All you saw was like blue and not blue, like clear, essentially. But the sort of reductive quality of black and white film, and I try to use like a little bit higher contrast film as well. Times that I've used like more sort of like mid contrast films with like less tight grain. A lot of times I feel like I'm kind of like, oh, I'm not getting this sort of like not being able to like reduce this down to the lights and the dark spaces, you know? And that's sort of that's what a lot of what I'm looking for. And that's what I kind of go for with masking when I do double exposures, is like, you know, I know that this part's going to be, I'm blocking out the light out of this part. And so that when I re-expose it, only the light part is going to, you know, only the light's going to show in that part because it's already got an exposure that's black on it, or dark. So yeah, that's a good question about this sort of like the quality of analog and especially black and white film stocks. And then with I think that I always think about, this is something that definitely learned in my lovely experience with digital audio, is that what you're doing with digital audio is making many samples of something that's physical, right? And so it's basically just an approximation, I mean, I think anyone's here, I'm going to write it on this card that says thank you, this is going to be nice. So if we take a pure sine wave, this is what is real, right? And then your 44.1 kilohertz sampling of it, so like what you hear on your CD or whatever, is actually that, So it just sampled that 1 second sine wave 44,100 times. So each one of those is a sample. This is me teaching doing my this is real sound lecture. But so I think that it's an approximation, right? And so that there's always going to be something that is lost in a digital experience. There's always something lost. And you can sample it more highly and lose less for sure. There's always something that's lost, and I actually kind of like that about digital art forms, is that you are always experiencing you're experiencing some sort of loss, right? And what we're doing right now, we're experiencing the loss of having this conversation in person with each other. We're able to gain something because most of these folks are in Chicago and we're in Minneapolis. That's the argument that most people are making, at least. But I think that it's important to think about what we're not seeing and hearing when we experience digital culture and digital media specifically. It's important to know that there's more to it that we're not exposed to, just by sheer nature of the way that it's captured and presented.
Yeah, so we're gaining distance but losing detail.
Right.
There's a trade-off.
Sure.
Your reach.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
that's
I really love using digital media as a means to purposefully destroy real media. I really love that. It's sort of these kind of purposeful acts of degradation. I'm really into a process in music or synthesis called bit crushing, where you're purposefully reducing the sample rate and bit depth of digital audio to make it sound less like it's supposed to. It's an even poorer approximation of what it sounds like, and then you just start to hear all of the weird aliasing and stuff that no one would ever want you to hear if they were, trying to make a pure sine wave. You're getting the jaggies and not the curve,
I wonder how much your sound knowledge translates to your light knowledge. You know what I mean? Do you apply any of basically the physics of sound to filmmaking, to a visual media?
Well, I mean, I think the most important aspect of that is time, for both time-based mediums. That's the way the audience is going to experience them. That's the way that you experience them, both while making them and while viewing them as the artist. I think to me, that's the most important similarity between sound and image, is time. I mean, we can talk about lightness and darkness and timbre and whatever, Western musical constructs, major, minor, all that stuff too. But to me, the most important things are the very sort of core rudimentary aspects of time,
I feel like a lot of what is this question, what I get from your work is about like something physical, that this experience of analog, experiencing a projection, experiencing sound coming at a person, and experiencing in-person contact is physical. This this that's so much of what I see in your work is just like it's all physical. It's it's like how you feel, like it hits you a certain way. Like that's I'm sure why Kristen mentioned soulful. Like what a word, because the sound is I mean sound hits us. It's a physical um thing in the world, sound waves, and so are light. And this question of I mean it's interesting that you're legally colorblind too. Like that's really that how we see the world through the physical ways that our eyes read color or read light. It's complete everything. I mean I'm always just fascinated by this the how the physics, that it's all physics really.
right?
And then you're doing this graduate program that is about this, it's space, you're talking about space, more physical. Like that's just this thing that I really get this sense. So I don't know, do you think in terms of like I mean even a digital transferring translation is and you're talking about loss, like I don't think that, again, I don't think there's quite a question there, but maybe you want to what do you think about this physics component, and do you have an interest in that?
In physics, I mean, I feel like I have an understanding of what's happening with like sound pressure levels to create sound in air that we understand with our eardrums and our brains. And, with the one thing that I feel like this sort of like this sort of lack of perception of color that I have, I feel like makes it more difficult for me to understand like color wavelength. And I've always been really terrible with like color theory. Like it's just not, I just can't do it. It's like those charts are what they show you when they determine that you're colorblind. They're like, what number is in there? And you're like, no, I got nothing.
Yeah. Well, and that color theory is so based it's both science and art. It's perception and physics, that to me is the most fascinating thing about color theory.
Perception, physics, and then also like, and socialization too, I think, what becomes acceptable, what becomes known,
What makes you want to make work? Like what starts the project? Like do you see something, or do you just, like when you're filming something, do you have a plan? I mean, other than thinking about the
a lot of time, I'll spend time out in the world without the means to make images or record sound. And I'll kind of take note, like I should come back here. I should spend more time with that. I don't have the opportunity to spend the time with it. I'm with my kids, I'm with my family, I'm doing something for work. I'm not able to really engage with this. So I'll kind of see places in the world that I want to investigate more. And then a lot of times, like I'll become kind of fascinated with the process, or even like especially with sound, like, and synthesis. A lot of times I sort of become fascinated with the process, and then like an instrument, or like a piece of equipment, where it's like, oh, how can I, it's sort of the same thing with the camera, where it's like, oh yeah, I see what this is doing, and I want to do something that I want to utilize that aspect of it, that mechanical aspect of it, or even if that mechanical aspect of it's something that's purely digital, and I want to shift it. I want to be able to intervene with it in some way or another. and I think, you know, I don't think like, oh, I want to change that. I think to myself, oh, you know what you could do with that is this, you know, instead of what it's intended to be used for, or what is, you know, what is like the traditional way to use this, you know, this piece of equipment, or this instrument, or even like space too. I think about that with, you know, kind of think about that with like gallery spaces too. It's like, oh, you're supposed to do this with it. It's a white cube. I see what you're supposed to do. You know, it's like, where are the pedestals? And you got plywood behind the walls, right? You know, it's like I almost never hang shit on walls when I do exhibitions. I just don't. It's like, it's if you hang stuff on walls in exhibition, you know, sometimes you have to, but it's like, and you have a lot of people like walking around and not looking at each other. So they're like, it's like so if you put something in the middle of the room, then you have people standing in a circle looking at a piece of art that you made. You know, it's like a more communal way of engaging with it, with art, in my opinion. Not that I don't love staring at gigantic paintings, but yeah, I mean, I think that the sort of, I mean, I think I kind of maybe I'm like I've exhausted the answer to that question and now kind of going in a different direction. But it's, I mean, I think that it's the idea that you know, any sort of like physical, you know, space or equipment, anything that is something that I feel like I'm supposed to engage with in a specific way. A lot of times I'm trying to think beyond the way that is intended, and that inspires me to make something out of it. I will say too that, you know, it's like I'm a little bit of an opportunist as well, where if I like might not make a piece of artwork if I didn't get a grant to do it, you know, or didn't get commissioned to do it. You know, that aspect of it is this like super, something that I'm actually really disappointed in myself by, is that I have this sort of like, it's like kind of giving into this sort of like social game of it all. And that's real though. And I'm not gonna try to like talk myself out of it. I think that that's real, and I think that it's meaningful, and I think that, you know, a lot of times, you know, it's like most of the work that I showed tonight was something that was either, you know, I got a grant to do or a commission to do, and they might not have happened otherwise. You know, I might not have just made the decision to go walk around a waterfall. You know.
I want to
Well,
ask
yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for the question.
I
Sorry for
appreciate
the long-winded
that.
answer.
No, it's so great. It's great to hear. And it's like we need that's why deadlines are so lovely. And
Yeah.
I feel like having my kids was actually the best thing to make me more productive, because it was like you had only so long while they're napping to get
Totally.
shit done.
Totally.
And then if I have you know, now they're older or in college, I'm like, well, we have forever. So you need a deadline.
Yep.
To
Yeah.
be productive.
Right.
Inspiration comes, it's a gift when it comes, and like this drive to do it
Totally.
is, and the pandemic I feel like has been a blessing in that way, because it's like, well, this is I better do something, you know.
Right.
So I'm not always, I mean, and also watch TV, but anyway.
Cool. Thank you for that.
I want to ask you something about opportunistic, but I'm going to let anyone else who wants to ask something go, because I've already had a few questions. If anyone wants to jump in.
Go for it.
Is Casey gonna defend his messy desk?
Casey's always got the cleanest desk in here. There's no question.
Oh,
here he comes.
What's up, Casey?
Hello. I think maybe wanted you to expand more on the use of the space, and maybe thinking about how the pandemic or the racial uprising, so to speak, in our city has maybe reformed some of your artistic goals or values, and wondering what you think about like how has your art practice changed in the last year, and like what you want to explore in the future?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I mean, I think that, okay, so obviously on May 25th, 2020, George Floyd was killed by the Minneapolis police in Minneapolis. And very close to where we all live. And, the uprising and destruction of most of the neighborhood that I, or many aspects of the neighborhood that I live in, and going out, waking up at like, well, being up at like 3 a.m, looking at Unicorn Ride and being like, oh, fuck, that's burning, isn't it? Okay. And then going outside at like 5 a.m. on my bike and just going and like surveying the damage for a week in a row like that. I feel like there was something about my like soul as an artist that kind of got like stripped out a little bit. And then I had this, I had this kind of like, it really, I think most people here, either you were painting a plywood, piece of plywood that's covering a window, or taking to the streets and doing some really, really radicalized activism. And God bless all the people that did it. I think that it changed a lot of people's ideas or about why and how they're making work here in the Twin Cities at the very least. And, I think that especially with regard to the way that I envision utilizing space that is intended for experiencing art, to me, it really has to have some aspect of like either like hope, community, generosity, absolutely like openness and equality. It has to have those aspects to feel useful. And that's something that I feel like as like white-bodied people, it's not the easiest thing to navigate. And I totally own all of that. And I'm really, a lot of the work that I feel like I'm doing in my program, grad program, is trying to push myself into a space where I'm trying to learn as much about people and artists and artist communities that haven't been a part of my circle, haven't been a part of my experience, a part of my crew. And that, to me, that's, I think about this space specifically and how it can be useful in ways beyond what I even know, like what I things that I don't know, and being open to unknowing, like not knowing. I think that's a huge aspect of the way that it has changed. At very least, my ideas surrounding a kind of like organizational or curatorial practice, for sure. I don't know. I mean, I think that is, to some extent, is kind of what you're asking. I think that there's got to be, I feel like my interest in sort of social practice has become far greater. I feel like, it's like whatever, like 10 or 15 years ago, it was like social practice. It's like I've definitely heard that term a lot of times. And now I'm actually and experienced what it felt like and what people's, what different people's takes were on it. But I think that right now it's like that the idea of what a socially engaged practice means is very different than what I knew prior to the last year, which is unfortunate. It shouldn't take something like that to rattle that up, to shake that up in my mind or my experience here in the Twin Cities. But I think as many of us are, we get used to something that's comfortable, and it's very comfortable, and can be very, very good to some people, and that's going to change for sure. Is that Casey? Is that you listening? Do you have me on mute?
My heater was on, and I don't want you to hear the clicking. No,
Sure,
that was
sure.
I agree with what you had to say. So, yeah, thanks.
Cool. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too.
Well,
Oh.
All right, I'm going to follow it with. I'm
Okay,
going to
yeah.
follow with a real brief one about.
last one.
Yeah, last one.
Because
Talking about being opportunistic, like as someone who is holding space for other people, I feel like that is necessary sometimes, and maybe it's easier to apply to that role where you need it for people to be able to share their work in this space. You need to hold it, and you need to take those kind of opportunities. And I think maybe just expanding on how you maintain openness and being a gatekeeper at the same time and blending it with being opportunistic is like a serious challenge, and like there's lots of blind spots. So maybe just hot take on that, and we can
yeah, because I think it's seriously inspirational too. I mean, I think that, you know, it's sort of like listening to hear you talk about it, or listening to you talking about it, it's just sort of like reinforcing some of our values, goals as a space.
That word chimes through my head all the time, though. Like opportunistic, like you have to find and make opportunities sometimes for them to happen, and that's one of the ways that I think about being opportunistic. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's good. That's good advice.
Are you saying you're trying to take up more space for more people to be involved?
I mean, I definitely have heard that from people. I've gotten that advice from people. You know, like, well, for instance, like Roger and Deanna Cummings, the directors of Juxtaposition. I mean, anytime they have an opportunity to buy a building, they do it, you know, or build a building. That's what they're trying to do right now, is build a building, you know. You soak up that space. You soak up space so that it can't become something else, you know what I mean? You know, and hold it. Doesn't really, in my opinion, a lot of, you know, it's a lot, even like an organization like Juxtaposition, where it's like, you know, a lot, their space, you know, it's like they have really nice facilities for people to make things. Some of their spaces aren't the most like, you know, flashy or like sexy. And that's totally fine, you know. I've definitely heard this kind of argument about the soap factory, for instance, where it was like, you just shouldn't have, why did you need a restaurant? You just didn't need a restaurant, you know. But they were like, people were like, yeah, but we needed an HVAC system, you know, and we like needed an elevator, and we needed there to not be holes in the floor, like covered by like inch thick pieces of like cast iron, you know, like, you know, things like, you know, very basic things like that. But then there's always this argument about a place like that where it's like, if you just wouldn't have been so damn ambitious, you could have hold that space. You know what I mean? Like, that's it. Probably would still be here if they didn't owe, you know, if there weren't like millions and millions in a hole. Don't quote me on that. Off the record for sure. But that's, you know, that's an argument that I've definitely heard about a place like that. So it's the idea of not only like being able to get your hands on a space for something to happen, but then being able to hold on to it, especially when things aren't really working out for you. I mean, it's like, think about this space during COVID, you know what I mean? It's like, I was talking to our landlord the other day, you know, and it's like kind of asking me about how we were incorporated and things like that. You know, I don't think he really knew that we were a 501c3 nonprofit. And I was like, no, you know, it's like, basically what I see it is that, you know, we're 12 artists. We don't need to be a nonprofit. We can pay our rent without that, you know, and being able to hold the space without having any sort of responsibility to, you know, any sort of restriction around what we do based on any of the like programming funds that we'd be able to get. That's way better. It's way better, you know. Why do we need that right now? We don't need that. What we need to do is hold on to the space so that not only we can utilize it, but the people around us can utilize it free from any constraint, you know, free from any sort of like governmental oversight, you know.
What's the next version of this conversation?
Yeah.
Another 3 hours.
Yeah, I know. We could keep going. Let's stop. We gotta stop.
Okay.
I like
I'm
how
sure.
Sounds
Yeah.
good.
so proud.
Crystal's probably like, he said it was an hour.
All right, we're gonna listen to Crystal and stop.
The kids are definitely watching Disney